You're listening to If Only I Were Wiser podcast, where Reyna brings together wisdom and raw life stories to provide encouragement and truth. So many times it's easy to become discouraged in your own pursuit of health because your story or circumstances look drastically different from your favorite influencer or even the expectations you had for yourself. If that is you, welcome! This space is for you to learn, breathe, and maybe just listen and see what wellness could look like for you. Hi friends, welcome back to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. On today's episode, I have y'all's favorite special guest, Joseph, to chat about all things crunchy living, how we've made that transition as a family, and his thoughts on it, and how you get your spouse to go crunchy. So I'll kind of share a little bit about how I got into the crunchy holistic realm, and then Joseph will share a little bit more about his perspective and how he's felt kind of making this transition. And I've shared this, I think, on my platform before, but all this really started for me when I was in college, when I had a really close friend of mine. Her mom was walking through cancer, and I just remember her coming to me one day and asking me like what kind of deodorant I had. And I think I was using like Old Spice because I loved the smells and I was all about smells. I was definitely a Bath and Body Works girl. And she was just telling me how her mom was walking through cancer treatment and how some of the things in our products, aluminum and deodorant, for example, could be really toxic to our bodies. And that was one of the big things that she was advocating for in her cancer treatment, was to start taking out some of the toxins that we're exposed to on our body and in our environment. So babe, what did it look like for you when I kind of first started after we got married, like having these conversations and getting started into all things crunchy?
So I'd say for me, it first started with like these small ideas or changes that you bring up based on things that you see. Just me being a more skeptical person about a bunch of things on media or even in books. I like to like review things myself. So I'm specifically in the beginning, I recall the vaccine book that we both read for Ledger. And I think that was a little more impactful one because I can read it for myself. I can see all the things that, you know, the author is saying. It's not just a random social media post of like, oh, it says this. Okay, and you know, that kind of makes sense. Okay, let's do it.
Oh yeah, I definitely forgot about the vaccine book. I think that you're right. That was the first big thing I think we faced as a family was when we became parents. Was I knew from all my personal research, and I was swapping out my personal care products and like making swaps, I guess, without like I was consulting you on things, but like I wouldn't tell you if I was like, hey, I got a new body wash. Like it wasn't this like huge ordeal. Versus choosing vaccines and my pregnancy and postpartum was a huge conversation we had for when Ledger was born. So do you even remember the first swap I think that you made personally?
I think for me personally, it probably would have been the deodorant. Mm-hmm. And I remember that one the most because it's probably more emotional because not all deodorants are created equal and not all people are created the same, how much they sweat or how much they stink. And I remember us going through about 3 or 4 different deodorants before we actually got to one that I didn't smell like a bag of like butts by yeah, because that's the easiest thing of like, I'm just gonna go back to Old Spice. Like I'll, you know, take my men's like 5-in-1 like body wash or whatever, or like 3-in-1 deodorant or whatever, because it's convenient and it works. But it did take us a little while to get to the deodorant that actually smelled good, which is native. You can buy it at Target and Walmart, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not totally a fan of native. It still has some smells and artificial fragrances, which are like usually a big no in our family. But this is, I think, where this conversation gets really important, is because like we have to balance this. Like I remember we had conversations early on while I was telling you about like, you know, we should toss out our deodorant. Did you know that like our Dove body wash has things that like aren't good for you, or like our toothpaste? And I remember going through this, you know, overwhelm phase that I know many of you guys can empathize with, of like, oh no, I have to toss it all because I'm killing myself and my family with all these things. No, Joseph was the first one that was like, Reyna, first of all, we're broke. We just got married. We just moved. Welcome to the army. But he was like, there's no point in tossing out all of this stuff because we don't have the financial means to go replace all of it right now. So I think we picked one thing every month, or like one part of the house for a season to focus on. And one of those first things we did was the bathroom. I think we swapped out our deodorants. We did body wash. We did toothpaste. We did like hair care products. Now I love Crunchy, and I have swapped out all of my makeup. I've swapped out all of just some of the more like detailed things. And it took a while. Like, we didn't make this jump all up front.
And it doesn't have to take a long time for everybody. That's just where we were in our stage of life. You can kind of think of it for those who like getting into fitness. There's people who like go about it really slow, and then there's the people who will go out and buy the smartwatches, the fitness apps, and the monthly workout plans or whatever. That's absolutely fine too. Everyone kind of goes at it at their own pace based on their lifestyle. And I think that was really the biggest sticking point for like Reyna and I, because our lifestyles like during the day are very different. 2 years ago, my office was next to a room that had, a sign on it telling women not to be in there because there were potential radioactive materials in it. Or when I go to the field, I'm sleeping in my vehicle all night, and by the way, that vehicle is on and it runs off of, JP8 fuel, and I'm smelling the exhaust all day long and all night long. So that was like a big sticking point for me of like moving forward of, well, why am I gonna, pay money for all these things or make these lifestyle changes when I'm just gonna go to work and, huff all these fumes from the generator that's running that I'm also sleeping right next to.
Yeah. And we've talked about it, like even from the vaccine standpoint, I think with the military, you get what they give you in all sense of that, whether it's your vaccine calendar or our moves or, I think when you move, and we've talked about it, like our mold situation was something that we weren't really prepared for, and it was just the hand that we were dealt, and we've done the best that we could in the transition of losing 90% of our home to mold and living in a toxic mold environment for 3 years. But, it was the hand that we were dealt, and we just kind of made the best choices that we could, i.e. getting an ear doctor or, like trying to be outside as much as possible. So I say that as an encouragement of, I knew I was doing all this research. I was looking up all the things. I was swapping all the little things that we could in our house, knowing that Joseph was going straight to work next to a radioactive building with all the EMFs that he wasn't getting at home, but he was getting at work, and his body was pumped full of anthrax. So I say that is just, there's balance in this. And I think for our family, we found the most peace when we integrated this slowly and intentionally, and a lot of grace and conversation. So I think a question that comes up in this, babe, is for those people that are either military or in similar situations like you that are kind of at the point of like, F it, my environment is super toxic. So why is it important to even make these choices at home if I'm going to work or another place or my car or whatever it is not healthy for me, and you know that?
Yeah, so I would say that if you apply the all or nothing mentality to non-toxic living, you're going to get overwhelmed, which is why if you take a step back and look at your own life, you probably don't apply that to a lot of other areas in your life as well. And so good news is you also don't have to do that for non-toxic stuff. Reyna talked about it earlier. Like we took one, area of our house, every couple of months. And even depending on what it is, it took us a year or two to make certain transitions. And you don't always do it right the first time. And by right, I mean like maybe not the best way. It's still better. Just like when someone starts working out, they don't go out doing sprints and running and trying to run a marathon. They might walk for 10 minutes and then run for 2 because that's what they can do, and that's what's getting them a little bit closer. I definitely sympathize with the people who are like, well, what does it matter? Because it's true. Some of it doesn't matter if you're still getting all of these other, toxins of whatever sort elsewhere. Definitely true. But every little bit still does help, and taking it over time allows you to actually be more knowledgeable about what you're doing, instead of just, oh yeah, I bought all these things, and then I can ask you, well, why? And you actually have no idea why, and you can't explain it to me when I ask you any questions. So taking it slower actually helps, I think, the mindset, and it helps your paycheck as well. But it does take time. It will make you feel like a fraud of like, what am I even doing with my life? Because I'm not doing it upstairs, but I'm only doing it downstairs. But it just takes time, and I think it is better for individuals to not take all or nothing mentalities, because that's just not the situation that the majority of us are in. We see that mentality with, like, athletes, or other very, very, very successful business individuals, but we don't know all the backstory of what did they do to get there. They have that all or nothing mentality because they're already somewhat at the top, so they can afford to do that, both monetarily and like metaphorically.
Yeah. And I'll take a image that one of my favorite fitness creators, Jordan Syatt, talks about in terms of like dieting is, if you have a flat tire, you're not going to walk out and slash your other 3 tires because you have one flat. Like, that makes zero sense. And I think it's so easy, especially in the non-toxic and holistic health conversation, for people to slash the other 3 tires because they're seeing these creators on Instagram with like an entire house of non-toxic things, and they're talking about it and sharing about it, not realizing it took them 5 years. Like, without the mold in our old house, like, we probably wouldn't have bought a non-toxic mattress for another 5 years from now. We've been doing this, we've been married almost 5 years, and we just now bought a non-toxic mattress because we lost our other one, and that was something we wanted to prioritize. Like, we just bought non-toxic bedding. But like you said, for the longest time, when I started doing the initial research, we just bought, I think it was, instead of like a polyester, whatever kind of blend in bedding, I didn't even buy organic cotton bedding. We just went to Target and got 100% cotton. So like, I think there's a lot of people forget in this conversation that there's like a good, better, best option. And it's this spectrum of non-toxic choices. And I totally agree. Like, financially, it is not wise to do this all at once, unless you are in the elite and have the means to do so. And so for our family, it's been a lot of balance, been a lot of patience in the integration process for us to finally have a non-toxic bedroom when we lived in toxic mold every day for 3 years. And a lot of people don't kind of see the backstory to that. And I'll honestly say, like, transparently, the motivation in going non-toxic for our family was when we became parents. Like, the vaccine-friendly plan was the first conversation starter that Joseph and I had. But then we realized, oh, it's not just in the pinpricks. It's in the mattress that we got him. It's in the clothes that he's wearing. It's in the toothpaste or diaper cream or clothes that he wears. And so, like, we've really had to fight to be intentional for him, more so, I think, even than ourselves, because I think that was the motivator for us. Like, he's potty training, we're working on potty training now. And so I think we did cloth diapers for a really long time. And then we switched to pull-ups, and we, instead of getting the like best option, we had a good / better option. But then I just ordered 100% organic cotton briefs, so I think it's just been, we've redundantly said it. It's been a process, but I think parenthood was a really good motivator for us to kind of take an overhaul.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned it in our last podcast of like, raising someone makes you ask the question of like, okay, well, why am I doing this? And so one of the good things is once when Reyna kind of brings up, because full transparency, she does almost 100% of the research of like what things we should swap out next. And then when she has something, she'll send me the links, or she'll have me read the chapter or whatever out of the book. And so once when that happens, it's no longer just, oh yeah, sure, we can do this. We can buy this thing. You're now being informed of a better way, a better life that you're providing for your family. In our case, for Ledger. And so once when Reyna's like, oh, we should get this for Ledger, it's no longer like, oh, we're just buying him X, Y, and Z. It's like, I am buying something that will benefit the health of my son. And so, and that is probably more so powerful than for myself.
Yeah.
Just because, as we mentioned earlier, like what my environment at work was like and could be like in the future, but having that reason, such as Reyna and Ledger, to push me towards, okay, well, why am I doing this? Helps tremendously, and that's why it has to be done slowly as well, because I wasn't doing any of these things growing up. We were using Febreze straight onto our pillows and blankets. Candles and plug-ins all around the house, sleeping with, the cell phone right next to my head as I'm going to bed at night, and all these other things. And so now once when Reyna's like, hey, let's read this, it's no longer like just about me, or it's now about Reyna, and it's about Ledger, and it's about, if you get more deeper biologically, it's about, the potential future kids that I can have as well. And one of the hardest things that it took me a little while to get over is, you look at everybody else and you're like, oh, well, they're not doing these things and they seem fine. And it kind of, fitness is really the easiest way to have a parallel between these two things. If there are also a lot of individuals that do not, have any type of mental or physical fitness, and they also seem fine, and that's okay. Because at the end of the day that by you doing X, Y, and Z, it makes you just a little bit healthier. It may not be leaps and bounds. It may not add 5 to 10 years onto your life, but it can also bring you joy, knowing that you are choosing the best option for yourself and for your family. And I want to hone in on the for your family part.
Yeah.
It may not work for somebody else. That's just how it's going to be. And so there can't be this, once again, all or nothing mentality of well, I'm doing this and you're not, so I love my family more.
Yeah.
My parents didn't do that growing up. They don't love me any less than I love Ledger. That's just if I was, if you were to put me in the position of my parents 25 years ago, I probably would have done what they did. And I think a lot of people undervalue that of hindsight is 20/20. I know all these things now. They did not know those things 25 or 40 years ago, when they had their first kid. And so having that understanding of this is where I'm at now, this is maybe where I want to be, and this is what I know, and this is why, can take you very far.
Yeah, I mean, it's access to information. I think Instagram, at least from my perspective, being a creator in this space, is I have access to so many amazing wellness resources, other women and their stories, practitioners. That is the point of this podcast, is there are so many things I didn't know in so many, we're only 26, so many seasons of my life. If only I were wiser. I want to be able to compile these things because we now have access to an abundance of information, which makes the discernment for your family all the more important, because whatever non-toxic sheets or deodorants or even my skincare that I love still may not work for you. And that's why I think we just need to guard our heart in social media and what we're comparing ourselves to seeing other families and creators on Instagram, because it's not going to look the same, because it may not work for your family, your budget, your time, whatever the situation is. So Joseph, the biggest question that I got, and I think I've repetitively seen, I've talked to friends, I've talked to other creators, is how do I convince my spouse to go crunchy? So one, I think, what's your first take at that question? And then we can kind of dissect it from there.
Yeah, it's definitely to not tell them they're wrong in what they're doing, because they're not wrong. They're just maybe a better way of doing it. It's not the way, it's a way. No one likes to be told that they're wrong if you go into any conversation and you're like, no, you're wrong about X, Y, and Z. Congratulations, you've now just created the world's best defense. And so for me, I'm a victim of my own experience, so I can't speak for other individuals. But for me, the best way that Reyna was able to get me to move along with certain things is information. Because once again, I did not grow up doing any of this. So if Reyna just wants to do X, Y, and Z, and she's coming strong out of the gate, I'm going to be like, I'm 26 years old and I've made it this far. I don't think I need to do that. And I've had a lot of pretty unhealthy habits. And so don't nag to get them to move along. For me, I have to have information. There are things, and I'll say it, and Reyna will like smirk. I still do not believe the hype of you shouldn't have electronics on your lap as a dude. And she's shaking her head right now, if you can't see it. Just still don't believe it. All right.
EMFs are a thing, babe. We've talked about it.
I know. And for all the men out there, Elon Musk says if you wear a helmet made out of phones, you would still be fine. Right. So, So that's our disagreement. I mean, we haven't crossed that bridge yet. Right. But we have, once again, the avoiding like the purist culture. We move our phones across the room when we plug them in at night. We have our lamp next to our bed is red light. So even though I disagree with that aspect, we don't have our phones next to our heads. We don't do blue light at night. Okay, so like you can still have compromises without going full blown. Because like some of these things can be inconvenient.
Yeah.
Wearing glasses during the day. I used to wear glasses growing up until I got LASIK, and then Reyna's like, you should wear blue light glasses. I'm like, I literally had someone laser my eyeballs so I wouldn't have to wear glasses during the day. And so providing them with information, and for me, depending on like availability of time, like how it's explained, just the information isn't enough. I may sometimes want to look at an actual study. Just to see a little more deeper. And so for me, that's the biggest thing, is providing information and then having a logical plan, which is taking an area of your house and saying, we'll do the bathroom because that's the stuff we're putting directly onto our skin. And then I think the next thing we did was our kitchen. We bought kitchen stuff, and we didn't buy it all at once because that stuff can get very expensive. We just bought the newer plates, or instead of having all of our, I think it was plasticware. We got rid of all the plasticware and we bought the Snap-on glassware, from Amazon or wherever. And then we bought the cookware. And then we, and then I think we bought our air filters and our Medify airs and put them throughout our house. And like, so really over 3 years, that's probably a couple $1,000. And once again, don't do that all at once just because someone online told you to. It does need to be a overtime thing that also parallels, how much information you're receiving on the topic. And so for me, that's the biggest thing, like just not being nagged at of just do this, because then I'm just going to be turned off. But being provided with information on the thing that you want to do with like a good rollout plan, I guess you could say.
Yeah. And I mean, like a tangible of that would be like raw liver, right? We know that raw liver is, or just liver in general is, a powerhouse nutrient. We've talked about it in terms of a prenatal, just all those things. And so as we're trying to conceive, Joseph and I sat down and had an honest conversation about, one, what am I supposed to be taking? Because I'm not going to take a prenatal to nourish and supplement my body, but also Joseph, like, what are you supposed to be taking? And one of those things was like an organ blend, like a liver blend. He told me from the very beginning, when I think I brought this up a year ago or 2 years ago, it was like, hey, it'd be way cheaper just to buy liver and cut it up and just take, little raw liver shots, which I did. And threw it back with orange juice. And he was like, Reyna, absolutely not. I will take liver from Perfect Supplements. So we just do desiccated beef liver. But he was like, you're not going to make me do that. I don't care how good it is. Like, that's disgusting. I'm not going to do it. So like, that's a compromise we've had of like, I provided the information. I guess method of transportation wasn't what Joseph wanted, but I don't think I really come at this from a place of like anger. It's been more like urgency. I think I've been more urgent because I know how much this stuff matters, and I know how much it plays into role in like our fertility, our son's health. Like there's research that shows like heavy metals in umbilical cords, you know, like I know the weight of this stuff, but I've tried at least to come from a place of like, hey, this is for the longevity of our health versus like the sexiness of Instagram of like having this new thing. Like it took us 3 years to buy a red light and we love it, you know, but the next thing on my wish list is a prana mat, which is an acupressure mat. You know, it's an over $300 basically yoga mat with spikes on it. And it would be super nice to have, but it's not something that works for our family right now. And Joseph knows that. He knows that I would desire it. In the submission realm, he's the one that makes the final decision. But I'm still encouraging him and providing the information of like, hey, I think this would be really helpful for both of our recoveries. What can we do in the meantime? Versus coming at you and being like, we need to do this now. You're a piece of trash because you're not doing all these things.
Yeah, and that's when like being realistic is important. Like whenever Reyna sends me these things, like we do have like notes on our phone of certain items and like where to buy them. So that way, whenever the time comes available, since we're in the Army, it's relevant. Whenever we, you know, change assignments, the Army does give us a lump sum of money to help out with the move. And you typically end up making money on the back end in regards to like you receive more money from the Army than you spend. And so we actually typically capitalize on that, and we make some of those more expensive purchases. Or around the holidays is when we bought quite a bit this past year. One, because we got rid of a lot of our stuff through our mold issue, but there are also plenty of sales. And so once again, that kind of goes back like that rollout plan of we'll get this here, we'll get this there. Let's hold off. This would be awesome, but I don't think we're here now because we're also trying to do this.
Yeah, and I think you can correct me on this, but I think it's taking a minute as a spouse, women that were programmed to be a little bit more emotional, and taking the emotional side of this holistic health conversation and like the urgency and transitioning it into something logical. I think that's been, like you said, the most helpful is like taking the emotion out of it and presenting like, this is why it's important, why we should make the change, or why what we're using is actually not as harmless as we thought, versus coming at you and being like making it an argument or like an emotional reaction to not swapping our like dish soap. So I feel like taking the emotions out of it, because at the end of the day, they're just things and you can replace all things. I think has at least helped our conversation from it being like aggressive or combative. Yeah, and another thing that is slightly off topic from what Reyna just mentioned, but she mentioned it a little earlier. Everyone's bodies react differently. So even if you are not doing these things, or let me phrase that, you are doing these things, but your friends aren't, their bodies may be built differently. And you could have the exact same diet, and your body will suffer worse from it, unfortunately. If I break my leg, I might heal faster than how Reyna heals if she breaks her leg. And I might be doing more for myself, or vice versa. And that's just the reality of it. So even though you are doing all of these things, some people just might be doing better off than you, just because of how your body reacts. And that's unfortunate. No one wants to, be in the realization that your body just sucks. But that may just be how it is. You're just on the shallow end of the gene pool when you were coming out. That's just how it happens. And so just kind of knowing that, and then once again, that goes back to like the all or nothing mentality. You don't have to be the best out there or with all the things. There are people out there that get free things just because they're popular on social media. Yeah. We are not those individuals, so we don't get that stuff. So everybody's reactions to all these things are differently.
So even though you may have the best science, that person who's not following these things maybe just be better than you, unfortunately.
Okay. Closing question, because I think it'll be good to just go over, like, for non-toxic living, if you could share any wisdom to your younger self or for a community that is listening, what would you share?
So my comment isn't really specific to non-toxic living, just because my younger self had no idea about any of this. And once again, even if I was to know what I know now, my younger self was not in a position to do anything about it. One, with how I was raised. Two, with like what money I had. Even when I got to college and had my own paycheck, I was not going to buy any of this stuff because it is far more expensive. The deodorant we get is like $9, compared to some of the other ones that are just a couple of dollars. So my advice would really just to be inform yourself. We have so much information on our fingertips. It doesn't have to be a book. It can be your phone. It can be the internet. So for me, like, there really isn't an excuse to not know any questions that you have on your mind. You don't even have to Google things now. You can just ask whatever version of GPT or AI is on the search engine and ask that thing, and it'll give it to you. So you don't even have to scroll down the first page, because we all know you're not going to the second page of Google. And they can find all of it for you and provide a synopsis and give it to you. And that's a hard thing to do. Sometimes it's not always fun, especially like when you're an adult and you work all day long and you then come home and you have a family. So you're not going to always have the ability to like sit down. So you really have to find times. So you're either going to be staying up a little later or getting up a little earlier. And like for me, that's still kind of not really an option of getting up early or going to bed later. Because then I would be getting up, before 4:30 or going to bed past 10:30. And that's not super awesome, because I did it for a season. It was not good for my health. Super productive, but I wasn't super happy. And so that's when, at the end of the year of I think it was like 2021, old Spotify gave me you listen to this many thousands of minutes of music. And I was like, whoa, that's a lot of minutes. How many audiobooks is that? And so that's when, or how many podcasts is that? And so that's when I really made the hardcore switch. And I also remember it was on the Joe Rogan podcast, because he interviews a lot of diverse individuals. And so he was interviewing Yeonmi Park, like someone who had fled North Korea. And in that moment, as I'm listening to that, I'm laying on my living room floor playing Xbox as Reyna's gone. And so I'm also like simultaneously, literally I have 100 pizza rolls on the pan next to me.
He's not kidding.
And she's like, I got here to the United States and I am probably reading 20 to 50 books a month because I've never had so much access to the information. And I'm just like, man, I'm a trash. I don't even think I've read 20 to 50 books
in a year
in the past couple of years. And so that was like really the tipping point of like, I am wasting so much time. So even if you have like an inkling of a thought, there's a podcast out there. There is probably a YouTube page dedicated to it, or you can go ask one of the AIs. And you might not know everything, and that's totally fine, but you'll at least be a little more well-informed. And this is also where like you have to get into your own interpersonal tact and like set down your ego of just because I read it and I feel confident about it doesn't mean it's true. That is one of my biggest fears of, especially like being, the biblical father and the head of the household. It's like I still ask Reyna tons of questions and get all of her input. But at the end of the day, I'm still responsible for leading the family and making decisions with Reyna. And my biggest fear is thinking I am absolutely right. And then after X, Y, and Z, I then find out, whoa, I was totally wrong just because I didn't read or I didn't know something. And so there's no reason to not go figure out a question that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you do read that thing, still have an open mind, because science does change. All the science that we have now is really just what we think we know. And then 100 years before us, they were all like, yep, this is it. And I'm sure Reyna's, I've heard it on some of Reyna's older podcasts. She's talked about some insane scientists from 200 to 300 years ago that were like, yep, women are witches for sure.
Yeah.
And everyone else is like, yeah, that checks out. She's writing using a pencil. She's definitely a witch, and it's like, yep, confirmed. And then obviously we know now that's not true. Obviously an extreme example, but like having an open mind, and even if you're talking to someone about the conversation, having the conversation from an opinion of understanding what they're saying, rather than you coming into the conversation and trying to be right. Because once again, even if you don't say that person's wrong, but you're coming in and acting like you're right, they know what you're saying already without you even saying it. Because if you think you're right, then that means, well, I think you're wrong. And then congratulations, once again, you just created the world's best defensive team out there, and they don't want to listen to you anymore. And then you're going to get upset. And that goes back to Reyna's point of, taking the emotion out of it and just having a conversation, because you might not know. You might know, but you don't always know, because things are changing constantly. So yeah.
That was so good. I hadn't even thought about like building a foundation of being informed. I think it goes for both women and your husbands that you're trying to convert, whatever it is. I think that's a great bottom line of like, be informed, period. And then, I mean, you answered my follow-up question of like, well, how do you convince them? And I think that's something we have in our marriage just regularly, is the conversation of like, are you coming into the conversation because you want to be right, or do you want to listen? And I think that applies perfectly to this and all kinds of conflict management and resolution. Is like, yes, usually the women are doing the research. The mothers are seeing this stuff on Instagram and like seeing what things we could do better in the environment, versus, and then coming home and being like, hey, look at all this stuff, which can be super overwhelming for a spouse like Joseph that is gone, upwards of 12 hours a day. So I think it comes down to being like addressing, first of all, your spouse lovingly and with grace, and then not coming into the conversation wanting to be right. But maybe just encouraging them to listen, and maybe just getting more informed. Like you said, swapping out some of our distractions for controlled learning, because there's more than enough information out there.
And some of those conversations will be hard to have, because that other person might not be as nice as you are in the conversation.
Yeah.
And so it will make you feel a little defeated at times. But that's just because they were just louder and more aggressive. But at the end of the day, you are trying to convey information both to yourself and to someone else. And that person is just trying to convey their emotions and their ability to be right. So I think this is a whole other podcast, but at that point you go into like somebody's character and like how they handle themselves in a conversation. And so that's really just what it comes down to when someone is trying to steamroll you through a conversation. They're not there for the actual information. They're just there to get that emotional high of like, I said all these things and they didn't have an answer for me. And that's not what you're there for in that conversation. You're there for the information, not to feel good.
Mm-hmm. That was really good. Wow, babe. And I will say, like, Joseph has been utterly gracious, and he's not like, I don't have to convince him, and it's never been this place where I like have to drag him behind me towards holistic living. I think some things, like he said, he believes that like EMFs are witchcraft, and I'm not of the same mindset. But Yeah. At the end of the day, like if you're dragging your spouse behind you towards adrenal cocktails and air filters and throwing your candles away, it's just going to make things more difficult. So maybe it's just having a season of prayer or compassion or doing all the things that you can for yourself or for your kids. And, you know, sometimes I buy Joseph's deodorant and I buy him one that he hasn't tried before because I really don't want him using native, you know? All that aside, I think that was a really good conversation. And I know you guys love Joseph. I got a lot of really good feedback from our marriage episode that he first came on, and I'll link that as well. You guys also wanted to hear his perspective on boundaries, which now that I think about it, might have to be like 2 separate episodes because between just our family trees and things that Joseph and I have learned about boundaries and resources and navigating family and friend boundaries. That might be 2 separate conversations coming up. But you guys wanted those alongside this episode as well. So be on the lookout for those. I promise those are coming. And I can't wait to see you guys on the next episode. Thank you for listening, friend. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you don't want to miss any wisdom or encouragement, be sure to subscribe to the show. And don't forget to rate and review. Your feedback means so much and helps our community grow. If you're looking for more wellness wisdom and free resources, head over to livingwiselywell.com or get connected with me on Instagram at wiselywell. And if you're looking for a break from the hurried health lifestyle, check out my Return to Rest resource for tangible ways to slow down and finally find rest.